Hey there guys, it's Mac here, and we're back with another video, and we're continuing in our series talking about mixed foundations, backline, and in particular the kick drum. In our last video we talked about how to get a great kick drum sound right from the source, about the kick drum, how to tune it up, how to mic it. So getting a great sound from your kick drum up there on the stage. Now we're going to come back here to the mix console, and we're going to talk about how we can now enhance, how we can reinforce that great sound that we spent so much time getting up there on the stage, how we can get that sound back here and through the front of house. Okay, moving on to our channel strip. Starting at the top, I just want to go quickly over the channel strip as a review, and we're going to follow this signal flow from the microphone. So the microphone is connected to the system, connected to the mixing desk, and so we have our microphone coming in on this particular channel, and we can follow the signal flow directly from top through to bottom. So starting at the top, we have a gain or trim control. Now what is that? A lot of people think that gain or trim is volume control, but it isn't. Gain or trim control, depending on who you're talking to, they might call it gain or they might call it trim. I'm going to call it gain just for our video. So gain control is input matching, meaning that the signal produced by the microphone is running at a really low level. Okay, we need to bring that level up to a suitable, usable level so that the mixing desk can then reinforce a strong, solid signal to the front of house. So we're going to use the gain control to optimize our signal to noise ratio. Now, that's a fancy term to just simply mean that we want to get the strongest signal we can before distortion. We don't want a lot of noise in the signal. If you leave your gain control too far down, the sound that you're going to get from that is going to be noisy, it's going to be weak, it's going to be thin, it's going to be anemic. It's a good word. But if I bring the gain control up and get as much signal as I can before distortion, I'm going to get a much clearer, much more definite, much more articulate, much warmer, fatter sound out of any instrument, not just the kick drum, any instrument. So gain staging is probably one of the things that I harp on the most. If you can take care of gain staging, take care of this particular part of the signal flow, you have done a lot to take care of the overall sound that you're looking for from that instrument. So you're actually going to have to do even less EQ if you have done a better job gain staging. So starting from the source, if you've got a tuned kick drum and you've mic'd it well, you selected the correct microphone and you've placed that microphone well in the kick drum, now you come here to the desk and you get a good solid signal to noise ratio from your gain control. So you've input matched correctly. You're going to get a great sound already without even having to go too far into EQ. So you're going to find that when you move to the EQ section, a good part of your job is already done because you're already getting a great sound from the instrument itself through a great microphone. And all you've done now with the gain control is you've matched that signal. You've brought the signal from the microphone up to a strong usable level, and the preamps inside that you're actually adjusting. When you adjust gain, you're adjusting a preamp inside the desk. When you adjust that preamp, you're running that preamp hotter, and when you run that preamp hotter, you're making it work, and you're getting the best out of it. You're getting the best out of those electronics by optimizing the signal to noise ratio. So enough on that. I can go on forever about gain staging because I think it's one of the areas that most people tend to fall down on. And I find that either one of two things happens. Either people don't gain stage enough, they don't bring the gain control up far enough So the signal's too weak and it's just not usable. There's a lot of noise in the signal. It sounds weak, sounds anemic. Or they bring it up too far and you're into distortion. So we want to get as close, the strongest signal we can before distortion. Okay, so how am I going to do that? I'm going to start by bringing my gain control down. I'm going to put on my cans. Okay, so I put my cans on. I ask the drummer to give me some quarter notes. So I've line checked them. I know I've got a signal there. Now I say to the drummer, okay, give me some quarter notes. Just do, bo, bo, bo. And as he does that, I put my cans on. I listen to the tone that's coming from his drum as I'm bringing up the gain control. So I'm listening, but at the same time, I'm looking at the channel strip VU meter, and I'm watching as the signal comes up on the VU meter. I want to be anywhere in between 0, at least 0. Okay, so some people will tell you 0 is where you want to be. They're going to say unity gain, that's where you want to be mixing all the time. That is, to me, the minimum. You don't want to be much less than that. Okay, unity gain is probably a safe place for you to be. So if you get that at least, you're in a safe place. But if you really want to get great tone out of the instrument, if you really want to get the best sound out of the instrument, if you really want a clear, definite, articulate, punchy, full mix, then you can actually, I would suggest that you run your gain hotter than that you actually run it between 0 and +9, even +12. This particular mixing desk, the way they've designed it, they give you at least 20 dB headroom on each channel strip. So you've got a lot of safety in there. You can punch the signal up pretty hot, up to +20 dB before you're going to hit distortion. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do that. I'm not suggesting you run up to +20 dB. I'm suggesting that you run between 0 and about +9, +12. That's going to take you into the first segment of the yellow on your VU meter. Okay, so if the kick drum is sort of bouncing in that range with an average in at about +6, +9, and once we get a compressor on, we can even that out and even run it a bit hotter. But if you're running in between 0 and +12, you're in a good place. You're getting a good, strong signal-to-noise ratio from the kick drum, from any instrument, and you can be assured that as we move on to EQ, to the EQ section, we're going to get a lot of control, and you're going to find that minimal movements of the knobs in the EQ section are going to create great changes, and your mix is going to sound, or that kick drum is going to sound amazing. So gain staging, take care of that, and pay a close attention to gain staging before you move on to EQ. Okay, so next we move into the high pass filter. This is logically in the linear flow of this channel strip EQ. This is the next thing we're going to deal with. We're going to engage a high pass filter. We're going to set it at about 50 hertz. Now, a high pass filter, what we're doing is, if this is my signal, we're going to set a filter so that the signal drops off at about 50 hertz. But it doesn't drop off like this. So if I have my signal here, it's not just dropping off like going off the end of a cliff. It's actually rolling off gradually. So if I set it at 50 hertz, it's actually rolling off so that rolling off linearly. Thank you. So it's just rolling off gradually. So I set a high pass filter at 50 hertz, and what I'm doing is, by getting rid of all of those frequencies down below 50 hertz, I mean, it's counterintuitive. You would think that the kick drum could use all of those sub-bass frequencies, but actually those sub-bass frequencies are more felt than they are heard. And in a room like this, with a sound system the kind of sound system that we have, we're not in a really controlled environment. If we were perhaps in a home theater environment where everything was controlled, we had a great room, we had a high-end audiophile system, we could probably keep some of that lower-end information in, and it would add to the experience by rumbling your guts a little bit. But here in live sound, when we've got lots of ambient noise, we've got a very reverberant room, we've got a very live room, and we've got a system that perhaps isn't at audiophile standard. All of those lower frequencies below 50 hertz, they're just adding noise and clutter to your mix, and they're not doing you any favors. So roll them off. Put a high-pass filter on the kick, roll it off at 50 hertz. Okay, moving on. Moving on to the EQ. So we have 4 sections of the EQ. We have high mid, we have low mid, and we have low frequency. So what I'm doing on the kick drum, and I'm not going to use this as a review for EQ, we've talked about a little bit about this in the past on how to use a semi-parametric EQ on a mixing desk. But I'm just going to show you the settings that I particularly use for a kick drum, and these are pretty standard throughout the industry. It's going to change a lot depending on the style of music that you're playing. So you might go to one audio engineer and he's got some different settings. You go to another audio engineer, he's got different settings. And that's all just because they're dealing with different musicians, different styles of music, and different venues. But here in live sound for worship, we've got a fairly predictable sort of middle of the road rock sound in a fairly predictable type of room. And many churches are dealing with the similar types of styles of music and similar types of rooms as well. So these are pretty standard types of settings, but they will vary. So if I give you these settings and then you run off to some other audio technician and look at what they've done, they may vary a little bit. But remember, don't take your cues from amateurs. Don't take your cues from amateur sound technicians or sound operators or sound engineers. Okay, go to the pros. Go to guys that do this on a regular basis and look at what they're doing. Okay, so what I'm giving you here right now is the years of experience that I've had as a sound engineer, both live and in the studio, and this is what I found is sort of a good foundational basic setup for a kick drum, but with the caveat, of course, that it always changes, it always varies. Even from week to week, it's going to change a little bit because the drummer is going to change, and they're going to have a completely different style. But for the most part, it should remain fairly predictable in a church environment, simply because as long as the kick drum remains tuned, and as long as the drummers are relatively consistent in their playing, and as long as the room doesn't change, which it shouldn't, you should get a fairly predictable type of setup. Okay, so starting with high frequencies, I go up to about 12.5K, and I roll about 3 dB off of at 12.5K. And I do that simply because we're looking for a low thump from the kick drum, and you really don't need a lot of the high frequency information. And about 12.5K, you're really just getting you're getting a lot of air, and we don't need that in the kick drum. So I just take a little bit of that out just to get rid of some of the high-end noise, and that'll clean up my mix a little bit. Moving into high mids, I go generally to about 3K, and 3K in between 2.5 to 4K, 2 to 4K is generally where the sound of the beater hitting the batter head of the drum, that attack, that's the range that that particular sound lives in. So the attack of the kick drum lives in between 2 and 4K, so I split the difference, go into about 3K. If you really want to hear it, then use your sweeping technique. Sweep between 2 and 4K while you raise the gain up to 6 to 9 dB. Raise it up, and as the drummer's kicking out those quarter notes, just sweep through between 2 and 4K, and you'll hear where the beater is hitting the batter head. You'll hear the attack of the kick drum, and you'll know exactly where to boost that frequency or cut it, depending on what kind of sound you're looking for. In rock, generally that attack, that initial attack of beater against skin, is something desirable, and it helps set the kick drum out in the mix a little bit. So I give about a 3 dB, 3 dB boost at 3K. Now moving into low mids, I go to about 250, 300 hertz, but it can be anywhere between 200 and 500 hertz. That's our mud range, and that's on the upper end of that, around 500 hertz, is where things get a little boxy too. So you could even go a little higher than that. But generally the kick drum, you know, there's a fatness that lives around 200 hertz, so you don't want to go much lower than that. But moving into that 250 to 500 hertz range, the kick drum begins to sound kind of boxy, and it also clutters up the mix where other instruments are living as well. We call it the mud range, and I've talked about that many times. There's that low mid area where a lot of information is being created by the bass guitar, by other drums, by acoustic guitars, electric guitars, piano, and even vocals. And there's so much information going on there, we really need to clean it up to allow other instruments to sit well in the mix. So what I'm doing is I'm actually going in at about 250, 300 hertz, and I'm rolling about 6 dB off on the kick drum. And I find that by taking out that muddiness, that boxiness from the kick drum, it actually allows the fundamental tone of the kick drum to shine through a lot better, and the kick drum sits better in the mix. Moving on to low frequencies, I go, as I told you last time, the fundamental frequency of this particular kick drum is about 65 hertz. So generally I want to go in around that range to try to accentuate the fundamental tone of that kick drum, so I get a nice heartbeat sound out of it, a nice thud, nice thump out of that particular drum. And if I mic it correctly, I shouldn't have to do a whole lot back here. So if you take the time to set up the microphone, you might come back here and find that you don't need to boost anything. In this particular case, we split the difference and we set the SM91 at about 4 inches from the head. We came back here and found that just a little bit of boost, about 2 dB at about 65, 70 hertz, actually just accentuated what we needed and gave us the sound that we were looking for. So that's pretty much the EQ section, and a bit of an explanation of why I've set the kick drum EQ section up the way that I did. One last thing before we kind of knock off for this particular video, is the polarity switch. Sometimes you may find that the microphone is interfering with other microphones, and when you get too many microphones in close proximity to one another, they can interfere with each other. And when they do interfere with each other, they can cancel out one another to varying degrees. And what that does is it results in a thin, hollow kind of sound coming from the microphone. So if you're hearing that, you put your cans on, you're listening to the sound of the kick drum, and it's sounding thin and hollow no matter what you're doing to the EQ, flip the polarity switch and see if all of a sudden that instrument, or the kick drum in this particular case, starts to sound natural again. If it does, then just keep it out of phase. Otherwise, just leave it in phase. Okay, so in phase is up, out of phase is down. And that pretty much takes care of gain staging, EQing, and phase alignment for the kick drum. It's a down and dirty, quick kind of video, and I know there's a lot of information there, so you're probably going to have to go back, rewind, and listen to it a couple more times. Like I said, if you have any more questions, email me, let me know, and I'll try to help if I can. So that's it for now. We'll see you next time, where we'll be talking about compressors for kick drums. Thanks, and until then, peace.